Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, most of my Cabinet colleagues have started off their speeches of reply by paying very well-deserved tributes to their junior ministers. Now, at number 10, I have no junior ministers. There's just Dennis and me, but I couldn't do without him. I am, however, very fortunate in having a marvellous deputy who's wonderful in all places, at all times, in all things, Willie Whitelaw. At our party conference last year, I said that the task on which the government was engaged, to change the national attitude of mind, was the most challenging to face any British administration since the war. Now, challenge is exhilarating. And this week, we Conservatives have been taking stock, discussing the achievements, the setbacks, the work that lies ahead as we enter our second parliamentary year. As you said, Mr. Chairman, our debates have been stimulating and our criticisms been constructive. This week has demonstrated that we are a party united in purpose, strategy and resolve. And we actually like one another. When I'm asked for a detailed forecast of what will happen in the coming months or years, I remember Sam Goldwyn's advice: never prophesy, especially about the future. Nevertheless, never mind, it's wet outside. I expect they want it to come in. You can't blame them. It's always better where the Tories are. And you, and perhaps they, will be looking to me this afternoon for an indication of how the government sees the task before us and why we're tackling it the way we are. Before I begin, let me get one point out of the way. This week at Brighton, we've heard a good deal about last week at Blackpool. I'll have a little more to say about that strange assembly later. But for the moment, I want to say just this. Because of what happened at that conference, there has been, behind all our deliberations this week, a heightened awareness that now more than ever, our Conservative government must succeed. We just must. Because there's even more at stake than some had realised. There are many things to be done to set this nation on the road to recovery. And I don't mean economic recovery alone, but a new independence of spirit and a zest for achievement. It's sometimes said that because of our past, we as a people expect too much and set our sights too high. Mr. Chairman, that's not the way I see it. Rather, it seems to me that throughout my life in politics, our ambitions have steadily shrunk. And our response to disappointment hasn't been to lengthen our stride, but to shorten the distance to be covered. But with confidence in ourselves and in our future, what a nation we could be. In the first 17 months, this government has laid the foundations for recovery. We've undertaken a heavy load of legislation, a load we don't intend to repeat, because we don't share the socialist fantasy that achievement is measured by the number of laws you pass. But you know, there was a formidable barricade of obstacles which we had to sweep aside. And for a start, in his first budget, Geoffrey Howe began to restore incentives to stimulate the abilities and inventive genius of our people. Prosperity comes not from grand conferences of economists, but by countless acts of personal self-confidence and self-reliance. Also, under Geoffrey's leadership, Britain has repaid $3,600 million of international debt which had been run up by our predecessors, and we paid quite a lot of it before it was due. In the last 12 months, Geoffrey has abolished exchange controls over which British governments have dithered for decades. Our great enterprises are now free to seek opportunities overseas, and this will help to secure our living standards long after North Sea oil has run out. This government thinks about the future. As you know, we've made the first crucial changes in trade union law to remove the worst abuses of the closed shop, to restrict picketing to the place of work of the parties in dispute, and to encourage secret ballots. Jim Pryor has carried all these measures through with the support of the vast majority of trade union members. Keith Joseph, David Howell, John Knott and Norman Fowler have begun to break down the monopoly powers of nationalisation. Thanks to them, British aerospace will soon be open to private investment. The monopoly of the post office and British telecommunications is being diminished. The barriers to private generation of electricity for sale have been lifted. For the first time, nationalised industries and public utilities can be investigated by the Monopolies Commission, a long overdue reform. Free competition in road passenger transport promises travellers a better deal. Michael Heseltine has given to millions, yes, millions of council tenants the right to buy their own homes. It was Anthony Eden who chose for us the goal of a property-owning democracy. But for all the time that I've been in public affairs, that has been beyond the reach of so many who were denied the right to the most basic ownership of all, the homes in which they live. They wanted to buy. Many of them could afford to buy, but they happened to live under the jurisdiction of a socialist council which would not sell and did not believe in the independence that comes with ownership. Now Michael Heseltine has given them a chance to turn a dream into reality. And all this, Mr. Chairman, and a lot more, in 17 months. The left continues to refer with relish to the death of capitalism. Well, if this is the death of capitalism, I must say it's quite a way to go. But, Mr. Chairman, all this will avail us little unless we achieve our prime economic objective, the defeat of inflation. Inflation destroys nations and societies as surely as invading armies do. It's the parent of unemployment and it's the unseen robber of those who've saved. No policy which puts at risk the defeat of inflation, however great its short-term attraction, can be right. But, Mr. Chairman, our policy for the defeat of inflation is in fact traditional. It existed long before Sterling M3 embellished the Bank of England quarterly bulletin, or monetarism became a convenient term of political invective. But, you know, some people talk as if control of the money supply was a revolutionary policy. Yet it was an essential condition for the recovery of much of continental Europe. Those countries knew what was required for economic stability because previously they'd lived through rampant inflation. They knew it led to suitcase money, to massive unemployment, indeed to the breakdown of society itself. They determined never to go that way again. And today, after many years of monetary self-discipline, they have stable, prosperous economies better able than ours to withstand the buffeting of world recession. So at international conferences to discuss economic affairs, many of my fellow heads of government find our policies not strange, unusual, or revolutionary, but normal, sound, and honest, and that's what they are. Their only question to me is this: has Britain the courage and resolve to sustain the discipline for long enough to break through to success? Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have and we shall. This government is determined to stay with the policy and see it through to its conclusion. And that is what marks this administration as one of the truly radical ministries of post-war Britain. Inflation is falling and should continue to fall. Meanwhile, Mr. Chairman, we're not heedless of the hardships and worries that accompany the conquest of inflation, and foremost among these is unemployment. Today, our country has more than 2 million unemployed. Now, you can try to soften that figure a dozen ways. You can point out, and it's quite legitimate to do so, that 2 million today doesn't mean what it meant in the 30s, that the percentage of unemployment is much less now than it was then. You can add that today many more married women go out to work. You can stress that because of the high birth rate in the early 1960s, there is an unusually large number of school leavers this year looking for work, and that the same will be true for the next 2 years. You can emphasize that about 250,000 people find new jobs each month and therefore go off the employment register. And you can recall that there are now nearly 25 million people in jobs, compared with only about 18 million in the 1930s. You can point out that the Labour Party conveniently overlooks the fact that of the 2 million unemployed for which they blame us, nearly 1.5 million were bequeathed by their government. But when all that's been said, the fact remains that the level of unemployment in our country today is a human tragedy. Let me make it clear beyond doubt. I'm profoundly concerned about unemployment. Human dignity and self-respect are undermined when men and women are condemned to idleness. The waste of a country's most precious asset, the talent and energy of its people, makes it the bounden duty of government to seek a real and lasting cure. If I could press a button and genuinely solve the unemployment problem, do you think that I would not press that button this instant? Does anyone imagine that there is the smallest political gain in letting this level of unemployment continue? Or that there is some obscure economic religion which demands this level of unemployment as part of its grisly ritual? Mr. Chairman, this government is pursuing the only policy which gives any hope of bringing our people back to real and lasting employment. Indeed, it's no coincidence that those countries of which I spoke earlier, which have had lower rates of inflation, have also had lower levels of unemployment. Now, I know, Mr. Chairman, that there's another real worry affecting many of our people. Although they accept that our policies are right, they feel deeply that the burden of carrying them out is falling much more heavily on the private than on the public sector. They say that the public sector is enjoying the advantages, but the private sector is taking the knocks, and at the same time maintaining those in the public sector on better pay and pensions than they themselves enjoy. I must tell you that I share this concern and understand the resentment. And that is why I and my colleagues say that to add to public spending takes away the very money and resources that industry needs to stay in business, let alone to expand. That higher public spending, far from curing unemployment, can be the very vehicle that loses jobs and causes bankruptcies in trade and commerce. That's why we warn local authorities that since rates are frequently the biggest tax that industry now pays, increases in them can cripple local businesses.